Agencies that are in business today will not be in business in 5 years.
What are the key lessons that you've learned?
Hope is not a strategy. Hope that it's going to be profitable and make you a bunch of money and you just keep focusing on revenue and driving revenue. That's not a good strategy.
But how should agency owners be thinking about profitability?
Profitability, I like to say, dies in the shadows. I took VC money. The business didn't really go anywhere. We were about to shut the business down.
What metrics define a healthy agency for you?
The only two things that matter: how much profit is going into the agency owner's pocket and how much time do you have to spend.
Meet Eli Rubel, founder behind Mattermade, No Boring Design, and Profit Labs. One of the sharpest minds in the agency space today, Eli's built and scaled multiple seven-figure businesses.
Every client needs to be above 60% gross margin. If you're not keeping that front and center every week, at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter, you go, "What? Wait, where's the money? Like, why aren't we profitable?" That would be a waste of fucking time for sure.
He turned a $500K revenue month with only 7% profit into a system that tracks every dollar and drives real margin.
If you want to be making $1 million a year in your pocket, what does our pricing need to look like? Churn need to look like? What does our team need to look like? What do our customers need to look like? Half of the agencies will probably just get wiped out during that process.
And now he's going public, sharing every move as he launches his newest venture, Profit Labs. Join us as we unpack the real playbook for agency growth, from build versus buy, pricing evolution, team prod structures, and the best ways to forecast profit. Eli shows us how to scale revenue and build for the future, all without bleeding efficiency. Trust me when I say you do not want to miss this. Eli, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Jordan, happy to be here, man.
I just want to kick off by, going through your backstory. So for those of you that haven't seen Eli, I came across him on LinkedIn, agency owner, puts out a ton of useful content, but I believe there's kind of more to the backstory than that. So did you also run a motorbike business back in the day?
You went way back into the archives for that one. I ran an e-commerce KTM dealership for about 3 years before selling it off to PE. And we were one of the largest resellers of KTM parts and accessories, which is like a dirt bike company for people who aren't familiar, in North America.
So what was the kind of backstory? Like, how did you get started in business? How did you end up buying that and then get it done to where you are today?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm an art school dropout. I thought I wanted to be a photographer way back in the day and went to art school, dropped out after about a year, and was waiting tables in LA, trying to figure out my life. And long story short, I read The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss and decided that, hey, like, this guy seems like he's kind of a misfit just like me. Maybe I can do something on the internet. Big air quotes there, because for the kids listening to this pod, like, back in 2008, 2009, it was still kind of really early days, and SaaS was just becoming a thing. Web 2.0 was just becoming a thing. So yeah, I moved into my mom's basement, quit my job waiting tables, and told myself I couldn't leave the basement until I started a software company. Started a company. We took on some VC backing and sold that business 3-ish years later. And so after the acquisition, I was sitting on some cash that I needed to do something with. And I remembered that saying of, like, if you love your work, if your work is like your passion, then you never work a day in your life. And so I thought, well, I love motorcycles. I had just finished right after the acquisition. I took some time and rode from Portland, Oregon, all the way through Mexico and Central America, down to Panama, with a buddy, and just had a blast doing it. I was like, I'm going to do something motorcycle related. That's the holy grail. And then I'll never work a day in my life. And it turns out when you make your passion or your hobby your work, then your passion or your hobby becomes, drum roll, work. So I actually am a pretty big advocate for not doing that when folks are considering taking something that they love and turning it into a career. But yeah, I ended up, long story short, I ended up buying this business from someone who owned it with the proceeds of my acquisition, and figured, like, hey, I want to take a break from software, learn a new skill. E-commerce was a new skill. I hadn't had any exposure to e-commerce before this. it was very non-glamorous. Like I bought the business, and the next day I showed up at 6 a.m. to the warehouse and started packing boxes and shipping them and learning how all that worked. After selling that business, I knew I wanted to optimize for family life. I didn't have a family yet, but I was planning on starting one, and wanted to have kids. And so I had this idea I called the tricycle life. And it was this vision of being able to, chase after my kid on a tricycle down a tree-lined street on a Wednesday, middle of the day, and, not have to be anywhere work-wise and have that flexibility. So to me, starting an agency was the next logical step to create that flexibility. So I started a marketing agency. This was 2019. I started a marketing agency called Mattermade, and we grew that business really quickly. Truthfully, looking back on that time, it was exactly that. It was just really, really good timing. We went from 0 to 4.2 million in EBITDA in a single year in 3 years. So our peak year was 2021. We did 4.2 million EBITDA on like 60 something percent net margins. It was insane. And again, like at the time, I thought I was some sort of business savant. I was like, holy shit, I've cracked the code. And now in retrospect, I realized, no, I was just, lucky to be in this amazing industry that we were in, which was like the tech space, while it was booming like crazy. And I was just in it. It was like a cash grab booth, and I was just, smart enough to pull the cash out of the air. And so that business came crashing down after that agency came crashing down after the tech bubble popped. I think if anybody serves tech clients, they remember the VC tech winter started in 2022. And it's kind of been like party's over since then. It's come back a little bit, but with AI. But for the most part, it was, those were the good times leading up to 2021. And I've had to slowly rebuild that business. I actually hired a managing director who runs that now. I just own it. And, brick by brick, we've refined that business and built it back up. And then in the meantime, I started another agency called No Boring Design. I'd always wanted to own a creative agency. I thought it'd be cool to I'm a creative guy. Thought I wanted to be, I went to art school after all. And so yeah, we built that business, and that became larger than Mattermade. Today it's around 27, 30 people. And I hired a managing director for that business. And then I basically was like, okay, I want to start one more agency, and then I want to be done. So what do I want to spend my time doing? And the realization I had along the way was for agency owners, myself included, agency finances, like having financial clarity, and not feeling like I was flying blind, was always a pain in the ass. When the business is small, it's easy. You can wrap your arms around the business. But as it grows, as headcount grows, as revenue grows, it's really easy for profitability to slip through the cracks. It's really easy to start to feel like you don't have your arms wrapped around about the business anymore. And then decision making starts to suffer. You're making decisions based on gut and hoping that the plan works out, but hope's not a strategy. And profitability, I like to say, dies in the shadows. You as the business gets more complex, it's hard to keep tabs on everything. And because maintaining strong profit margins has historically been something that I'm pretty good at, I wanted to bring that skill set and those like hard lessons that I learned along the way to other agency owners. So I started Profit Labs, which helps bring financial clarity to other agency owners.
Okay. I have a whole bunch of follow-up questions on that. So firstly, that is an insane story. I think the first follow-up I want to start with, it sounds like you hit success very quickly out of the gate in the online space. Is that true? And what would you put that kind of speed to success down to?
I think I stumbled into success. It's funny when you talk with people who have found some success. everyone talks about it differently. Like I find myself having a lot of imposter syndrome because, like the real story on my first software business, for example, is I took VC money. I had no idea what I was doing. I had a ton of energy. I, worked really hard at it. The business didn't really go anywhere. And we got super lucky and found a strategic acquirer the same week that we were about to shut the business down. So it's like, do I call that a success? In my book, it was a huge success because it changed my financial picture forever. But in the scheme of like a Silicon Valley, and I'm open with these numbers, like we sold that business for $3 million. So it's like in the scheme of a Silicon Valley exit, that's like nothing, right? But for a 24-year-old college dropout, that was everything. So everything's relative. The agency, I already explained kind of my ethos on the agency success with the first one with Mattermade, where I think I was in the right place at the right time. And I am a firm believer that you have to manufacture your luck, but I do still feel like I was lucky to be there, right? Yes, I showed up and I put in the reps, but it wasn't out of like sheer talent that business was successful. It was just out of right place, right time, right effort level. And I think that's probably been the through line in my journey so far, is remaining curious and open to trying new things and pivoting when necessary and just keeping at it. Like I've actually never met anyone who's stayed in the game, whatever their game is. If it's, being in the tech world, startup world, agency world, whatever it is. I've never met anybody who stayed in the game over a long period of time and hasn't found success. And I think that's that all kind of rolls back to that concept of you manufacture your own luck. And if you increase that surface area for luck to happen over a long enough period of time, then you're going to get lucky.
Would you say that a lot of other people that you've seen are, quote unquote successful, right? But in your eyes, successful, is that also from right place, right time? At least the majority of the time?
Yeah, I think the majority of the time, sure. Yeah, there are some people that I see who are just amazing operators, amazingly talented leaders. But I think that's a lot smaller than the people who are just like really good at hustling and staying in the game. And that kind of compounds for them over time.
Okay.
It's like 90 or 90-10 even.
Wow. The second part of what you said there about increasing the surface area of your luck, what does that mean and how can someone do that?
Yeah, this is the thing that I think is behind probably all of my success, which is part one is staying in the game, as I said already. And then part two is putting yourself out there and just staying out there, right? Like it's easy as a founder to have imposter syndrome and to not feel like you're qualified to be in the room or whatever that looks like. But the fact of the matter is that's always going to follow you, I think. So it's followed me, at least I'll speak for myself. It's always followed me. It just changes over time, right? Like when I was a first-time founder, I could be around someone who owned a business doing $250K in revenue, and I'd be like, I'm not, they know everything. I don't know anything. And like, today, maybe that's like, I could be around an agency founder who's doing $20 million top line. And I'm like, damn, like that's impressive. I haven't done that before. And then feel like some imposter syndrome. So it just changes over time. And it's the willingness to put yourself out there in spite of the imposter syndrome, to meet new people, to network, to just continually stay in the game and try new things that increases that surface area for luck to happen. Because eventually, one of those relationships is going to change the game for you.
Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is the different industries. So you've kind of worked, SaaS, e-com, agency, and you seem to have picked agency now and started a few things in that space. So my first question is, how do you find working in the different industries? Why not just kind of stay in your lane initially and focus on SaaS? Like, why did you try the others? And then secondly, why do you like agency, or why are you kind of keeping playing in that space?
I left the SaaS world because I was burnt out after my first whack at it. the acquisition itself was really stressful, and the aftermath of the acquisition was messy. It wasn't, a clean process. And so I just needed some space from the SaaS world. So e-commerce was kind of my break, try something new. I learned that e-commerce is super hard, and man, I didn't like carrying physical inventory. So I decided that the e-commerce business model for me, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that we were selling automotive parts, and like every single year they go, every year that you're carrying a 2000 apart from 2010, it's becoming more and more obsolete, and fewer people need it. So it's a really risky business model in my mind. And I'm sure if you manufacture your own product and it somehow is something that people in China can't copy, then maybe like e-commerce can be this holy grail. But for me, I didn't crack it that way and decided to move on. Ultimately, staying in the agency space has been about the ease and speed with which I can set up new agencies if the market changes, and the amount of profit that I can squeeze out of them in a fairly short period of time without anybody to be accountable to, right? I don't have a board. I don't have investors. If I want to take money out of the business, I just go and make the transfer, right? It's not like a thing. And also setting my own rules, right? Like I don't work on Fridays ever because I take my daughter skiing, or mountain biking, or, I just take the day for myself, whatever it is. But, I love the flexibility there.
Picking up on another comment you made about agency being for freedom, I feel like I know a lot of people that run agencies where that is not the case at all, and they've almost built their own kind of prison. How have you managed to build agencies where it's freedom?
Yeah, I mean, I think more often than not, agency is not freedom for most people. For me, if I had to pin one skill set, and I think if you asked the people who are closest to me, both in business and personal life, what my skill set is, it's probably they would probably say something about how I operationalize myself out of businesses. I'm a really big fan of systems and process, which is kind of hilarious for an art school kid who hated, math and spreadsheets and didn't want to have anything to do with like being told what to do. And here I am like, wait, let's just make this a repeatable process. And great, like I'm not the best person to do this. Let's find someone who's smarter than me at this one thing and have them in charge of it. And so breaking business problems down into small pieces, defining how they should go, and then hiring someone who, again, like I don't ever want to be, I think founders are good at being generalists, and that's what makes us, a good founder. We can jump into a bunch of different things, but then there's this trap where we start to feel perhaps like we're the best at all of the things, and that's just not realistic. And I think if you find yourself feeling that way, then you just haven't found the right caliber of people, and you haven't clearly defined the swim lanes enough. Because, for example, like I don't think I am, nor do I want to be the best at project management. That sounds awfully boring to me. So like I go and hire a great project manager, and they own it and they run with it. Now I don't worry about project management. If project management is failing, then like I go replace that person. But otherwise, I don't worry about project management. So like that's now a bucket in my brain I don't have to think about. And you just go around the horn, each category: sales, marketing, client delivery, just all the possible roles, operations, until you find yourself with a business that has a bunch of people who own each category, and you then have the space to own the strategic direction. And maybe you keep some specific categories. Like I love selling, I love sales. And so with this new business, like I don't plan on replacing myself in sales for a while, just because I've done that already. Like my other agencies that I own have sales reps that, I'm not involved in sales calls, and I haven't been involved in sales calls for a very long time. for those agencies. But what I discovered was when I remove myself from sales, I lose this dopamine thing that I love. And so with this new business, I'm like, shit, I'm just going to purposefully choose to stay involved with sales for a while because that gives me good vibes. And like, I feel pumped up at the end of the day if I've closed a new deal or, made some progress with a prospect. So that was a long-winded answer to your question.
No, it was good. Am I correct in saying, though, that aside from the kind of sales piece in this new project, you see your role as kind of strategic direction?
Yes. Yeah. I see my role as relationships and strategic direction. So, because of the nature of my experience and the offering that we have, like for all of our early customers, I'm personally sitting in on all of the calls, even though I'm not leading them. We have a finance manager, a fractional CFO who's leading these calls and is the primary point of contact for our clients. However, I sit in on every monthly meeting because I have value to add, and I'm curious about their business, and I want to troubleshoot with, like, it's fun for me. Basically, I'm orienting this whole new business is all about like what gives me energy, what type of stuff do I actually genuinely like nerding out about. I haven't positioned it so that I'm part of what people sign up for, but I just like show up anyway because I think that's a good way to keep myself engaged, curious, learning, and also add value to the clients.
Okay. And then for the other two, when you say strategic direction, what does that involve?
I'm not responsible for strategic direction anymore for those two businesses. So the general managers, the managing directors are the ones responsible for driving that. So they basically just have a profit goal, and how they get there is up to them.
Okay. I want to come back to that process of hiring an MD and kind of how you manage that in a moment. But just to round this off, what is your North Star or kind of what are you trying to build here with the three different agencies? Like, where does it go from here?
Yeah. The very unsexy answer to that question is I just want a stable, predictable, maybe even fairly boring portfolio of cash flowing businesses that I can rely on to produce the income that I need for my family to be, living the life that we want. And for me to be able to control, which I do today, like control the amount of time that goes into creating that income. I think, another piece to this is I want these companies to be places where people look back on their time working at these companies and feel good about that time. It's easy to, there are a lot of shitty bosses out there and I don't want to be one of them.
Okay. And in terms of building that portfolio, would you ever buy? And is there a reason you've started 3 from scratch now yourself?
Yeah. So this might be in the category of hot takes. And I try to stay positive, generally speaking. But so if this was 10 years ago, I would be very interested in growth through acquisition. Maybe even 5 years ago, because we didn't know it was coming with AI 5 years ago. I pretty fundamentally believe that most agencies that are in business today will not be in business as they exist today in 5 years. Mine included. I just don't think, I think the industry is going to just go through some seriously fundamental shifts and changes. If I were to guess, like half of the agencies will probably just get wiped out during that process. They won't be fast enough to adapt or willing to adapt, or they won't believe they need to adapt. And then before they know it, they'll just be out of business. I think that then the ones who are open and curious and clever enough to adapt, 5 years from now, their business will look nothing. It'll just be like, whether it's their offering is totally different or the way they deliver is totally different. It just won't even resemble the agency that they own today. So that's why I don't believe acquiring agencies is a good idea right now. I just think there's too much risk in carrying that debt. If you're buying an agency out on a multiple that, you're breaking even 3 years down the road on like a 3x multiple, let's say, well, if the agency is in hot water 3 years from now and you're having to reinvent the agency, then the value you paid for it doesn't even exist anymore, really, because you're having to reinvent it. And you're left holding the bag if it didn't pay for itself in 3 years. So
the future cash flows could be zero, right? So you're pricing that in by not buying.
exactly.
What would you say, like, how in terms of those AI changes, how are you staying on top of that or trying your best to position yourself?
Right now, it's just trying to stay apprised of, I mean, it's moving so fast, as we all know. So right now, it's trying to stay apprised of what's going on and just looking for ways to leverage these new tools within the businesses. I haven't yet, turned our offering into being AI related or powered by AI in any way. So right now it's more along the lines of, how can I augment our workforce where maybe a team member would spend 50% of their time on tedious tasks that are just like, they don't enjoy doing those tasks. And now I can free up that time for them to be more strategic or more hands-on with clients or whatever that looks like. So for me, that's how I'm staying up on it. And then I think by being in the loop and knowing where it's going, or at least seeing what's changing, I'll be best positioned to pivot when the time requires it.
Okay, makes sense. And obviously now you've started, 3 agencies. You've got a lot of kind of experience in the space. What are the key lessons that you've learned kind of scaling them in the past?
Yeah. Oh man, so many. And I say that because I've made a lot of mistakes along the way, and I've hopefully learned from a lot of them. So I think the first mistake is that founders tend to, like, I see a lot of agency founders staying too involved in client delivery. And the sooner you can pull yourself out of that, the better. And I know that goes against what I just told you I'm doing with Profit Labs, but that's a conscious choice. Like I'm doing this because this will be my last agency, and I just want to kind of enjoy it and marinate in it. But if I was building another agency to be as efficient of a business as possible, I think getting yourself out of client delivery as a founder is almost the number one thing. Because once you've done that, then it's scalable. Then you've got an archetype that you can hire for that can deliver to the clients, and you can manage their performance. So that's one. Being more elastic with pricing, like price sensitivity testing, is something I talk about a lot. I think a lot of agencies undercharge for their services and assume, mostly out of imposter syndrome, that they can't charge more than they actually can. An example of this would be Mattermade, the marketing agency. We started off, I think my initial pricing was like $2,500 or $3,500 a month. At our peak in 2021, our minimum was $40,000 a month, and we had clients paying us, $45,000 a month. We had one client paying us $200,000 a month, like just bonkers, right? And again, it started at $2,500, $3,500, and truthfully, the offering, like the actual delivery team, changed it changed a ton from 2,500 to maybe 15K. But from 15K to 40 a month in fee, the team didn't really change that much. So it's all just perceived value and how you position yourself and the clients that you can sell into. So that's a big one, pricing. Another big one that's related to pricing is I don't actually necessarily believe anymore that having the highest price is the best path. So when I was coming off my high horse at Mattermade during high times, and I was like, oh, we charge 45K per clients. That's our thing. We're amazing. Once I saw the backside of that, which is if the market shifts and you're the most expensive thing that they're paying for, you're the first thing to get cut a lot of the time, especially because most agencies are nice to haves at the end of the day. Like, if you, as the VC market did for the CEOs, back in 2022, if you go to a CEO and you say you need to reduce your spend by 40% basically overnight or you're fired. Like the board is saying this. Guess what gets cut first? It's like marketing and advertising. We'll just rely on our sales reps. That's what they tell themselves, at least. Creative, right? It's a nice to have, not a need to have. Suddenly all the people who are saying like brand is the most important thing, they're like, brand can wait. We're good. So if you can find a way to have a lower price point and a higher volume of clients, I personally think that that's the way. That's what I'm building. That's what I'm doing for Profit Labs. Like our price point starts at $2,500 a month and doesn't go much beyond $5,500 a month. And that's because I want very little customer concentration so that if a client leaves, which we haven't had any clients churn, but if a client leaves, then we don't feel it. It doesn't really hurt. It's not a big deal to replace. Whereas, if you have these bigger tickets and the client leaves, you feel it and it's a big deal and you're more at risk for having to augment your team, for example.
You mentioned that, the pricing or changing the price and being able to charge more was more about kind of perceived value and positioning. Could you just unwrap that?
Yeah. I mean, up until a certain point, the same goes for other industries too. And maybe that's a better way to illustrate this. Like people who buy Gucci or Prada or, fill in the blank, like Italian designer that's sold in malls for excessive amounts of money. Like, do you actually think their leather is that much better than the seller on Etsy who, sources from a boutique farm and wherever and tans the leather themselves? Like, no, it's not. Do you actually think that they have artisans who have, they're like, it's old grandmas who have been doing this for 1,000 years and they're stitching it with like silkworm? No, it's fucking mass produced, man. And so that the reason they can charge that much more is because of perceived value, right? They tell an amazing brand story. They tell you the story of like the babushkas in the warehouse that are just experts at their craft, and you kind of, it conjures up these images of like elite, whatever the fuck. But the fact of the matter is their cost of goods sold is not higher than the next person necessarily. And so I think agency is the same way. Like you, up into a certain point, yes, you still need to have a high quality product and a high quality team and everything, but you get to a certain point and the increases in price are just purely messaging and positioning and whether or not like people are willing to pay it. A lot of times that comes through outcomes. So with Mattermade, for example, the only way we were able to make those jumps in pricing beyond where the value actually was, which was probably around like the 15 to 25K a month range. It was like it cost us 15 to 25K a month. Let me say that again. It required us to charge between 15 and 25K a month in order to hire the level of talent that we needed to deliver the outcomes that we delivered. So if that's in like the real realm of pricing for that business, anything above that is, again, perception. So once we started producing results that were really incredible, I mean, these names are going to feel old for people listening now, but we were the first demand gen team that was brought in to grow Loom, for example, Hopin, Kong, Dropbox. Like we had some incredible wins on the board, and because of those incredible wins, then we could turn around and say, this is actually funny. I made part of our sales pitch was, people would be asking like, hey, I've talked with your nearest competitors, your prices are way higher. And my answer, and I would usually bring this up and like instigate it on a call because I thought it was a fun way to sell. I say, listen, our nearest competitor charges $10,000 to $15,000 a month less than we do. Flat out. The only reason why you go with us is because of these logos, like these companies that you know and respect. They hired us, we did the job, and now you see where they are. We can dive into the specific results if you want, but like that's why you pay the extra 10 to 15K a month. Is our team size twice as large? No. Is, are our meetings going to feel super different? No. All I can say is like, we put wins on the board in a specific way, and that's why people pay us more. And I would close deals that way. Like especially when money was free flowing and these founders were pinching pennies, like they'd hear that pitch and they're like, well, I don't want to be the one who, went cheap on my agency and didn't become Loom. Like that would be a miss.
Okay. So it's about the kind of logos and previous experience that you've got and then selling people on the outcome. That's how you end up charging way more.
I think that's how you create the gap. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything that you recommend doing differently in kind of the rest of the sales process from kind of lead gen to closing?
In order to raise prices?
Yeah.
I mean, I think off the cuff, there are really two ways I see selling agency services. Way one is show, not tell. So, most of your competitors in any category of agency are going to be saying very similar things. So if you can get away from saying things and instead showing things, that's usually a great way to move someone through a funnel. That the other way is the mysterious way, or like the kind of thumping of the chest way, which is what I described earlier with Mattermade, where it was like, we're the fucking best. Here are our results, as you can see over here. Take it or leave it. Like, I'm not even going to waste my time on more calls than this. I've got a bunch of people waiting in line. We have a wait list. Like, you want it or you don't. I've got a proposal out to 5 other people right now, and we have 1 slot, right? So I think in my mind, those are the 2 great selling methods for agencies. One of those you can only do if it's true, right? Like, you can only take the bravado path if you're on an absolute tear and in high demand. Otherwise, it's the show, not tell.
Okay. And then in terms of the types of clients you serve, I'm assuming kind of when you were killing it at Mattermade, it was much larger, enterprise clients. It sounds like now with Profit Labs, you're focusing more on SMBs. Is that correct? And is there a deliberate kind of pivot there? Or is there one of those 2 categories that you prefer working with?
Yeah, I mean, it's different strokes for different business models. So Mattermade, today we serve most often we serve later stage tech companies who frequently are backed by like private equity. They're no longer playing the VC game. They're profitable. We like that space because Mattermade is very good at putting measurable results on the board very quickly. And so, and private equity backed companies are all about the numbers. So like, you don't get the ego, you don't get we just brought someone in new and they're going to fire all the agencies and bring in their favorite agencies. That's very common with VC, because everybody's out to prove something and, grow 1,000x overnight kind of a thing. Whereas in the private equity market, you can be like, we're going to reduce your costs by 30% and increase your lead volume by 20% in the next 6 months. And if you can actually deliver on that, the private equity guys are like, fuck yes, we want that. Go do your thing. And then once you've done that for them, world's your oyster. You can do this for their other portfolio companies. So that's Mattermade. No Boring Design, which we haven't talked too much about. They serve a pretty broad spectrum of clients, mostly tech focused, but earlier stage. So call it, Series B through to more mature businesses. But we also work with some enterprise, like that business also works with some enterprise companies as well. And then Profit Labs is very much more specific, right? We're only working with agency founders, typically between the $1.5 to $10 million in revenue range.
Okay. So the type of client you choose to work with is kind of dependent on the business goal and the positioning of what you're going after. Is that from
Exactly.
Okay. And are there, kind of zooming out at a macro level, are there kind of pros and cons of each client type?
Sure. I mean, the way that you have to manage and hire are going to be very dependent on that client type you're going after, right? Like, for example, with Profit Labs, the team that I've built, the processes I've built, the way that we approach problems is very well suited for an agency that is, again, between that 1.5 and $10 million, maybe even up to 15 top line. But if you go beyond 15-ish top line as an agency, things start to look quite a bit different. You're considering bringing this in-house, probably already have brought this in-house. Your pains are different. You need a different type of team to deliver on those pains. And so, each of these businesses, enterprise, like, you need a different type of account management talent in order to manage an enterprise account and not lose it and to expand it. And that's much different than managing a Series A or Series B startup where it's just like a totally different ballgame. So yes, each one will dictate, like, how you choose to position yourself in the market, and the segment that you sell to will dictate who you're hiring, how you're training them, what you say yes and no to within the business. Everything changes because of that.
Okay. And if we kind of go as far upstream in this kind of decision-making process as possible, does it start with kind of your offer and who you're kind of positioning and targeting and your kind of ICP? Is that like the first principle and decision one that you need to make?
Yes.
Okay. And then I'm assuming kind of downstream of that at the next level, it's kind of how you do lead gen, where you find those people and then the team that you kind of build out to service those clients. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, kind of on that point around kind of lead gen, what have you seen as kind of the best channels across those different client types?
Well, I think it's then you're getting into the cross section of client types, but industry as well. So, the way the go-to-market strategy for Profit Labs is very different. We're targeting agency owners of a certain size, totally night and day different than the way that No Boring Design captures clients and the way that Mattermade captures clients. They're all very, very different.
Okay. How do you think through then at the first principle level how to build out a go-to-market strategy?
I have a certain playbook that I tend to run over and over and over again. It needs to be tweaked again based off of what industry and segment, market size, all that. But it's usually a combination of founder brand, influencer partnerships, and cold email, cold LinkedIn. And with those three components, I've been able to grow the agencies that I've grown. I'd say those are probably the most key components of my growth strategies and go-to-market plans. There's other things. Podcasting is obviously a great one. But in general, those are like the key building blocks that I've gone back to time and time again.
Okay. And over time, do you, I'm assuming you're trying to remove yourself from those businesses. Do you rely less on the founder brand and kind of content and more kind of on other channels?
Yeah. I mean, founder brand isn't helping Mattermade or NBD anymore, right? Because all my content is about agency stuff. So founder brand can't scale across a portfolio. I think it has to be specifically attached to a company. But I think you can be, for example, you could be uninvolved in an agency and still have a founder brand that drives leads for it. So like if, for example, actually NBD is a good example of this. Back when I was talking about design and creative agency stuff, I was able to generate business for NBD, even though I wasn't the one taking the sales calls and doing the delivery. Like I was uninvolved with the day-to-day operations of the business or minimally involved. But because I was active on LinkedIn and still doing the LinkedIn thing, founder brand thing, it was still benefiting the company. But yeah, I would say founder brand specifically is a tactic or a strategy that I would only recommend for founders that are planning on being very involved with that specific business over 3 to 5 years. Otherwise, it's not worth the time.
Okay. And then in terms of that sales process, what do you recommend for that? And what does that look like for a good agency?
How do you mean?
So you got the kind of leads coming in from, let's say cold email or the founder brand kind of channel. What are you doing once you've kind of qualified those leads? What does the process look like to close them?
Yeah, so it depends on the offering. For some agencies, having a foot in the door offer is a great way to go, where you can, let someone open up their pocketbook, but not to an extent that gives them, a stomach ache, and essentially use that to do some co-discovery together, where it's like they're putting some skin in the game, you're putting some skin in the game. Through this process, you illustrate to them your value, and it makes it really easy for them to buy down the road. An example of this for Profit Labs is we do a profit audit where people can pay, it's $1,000, and we'll take in all of their QuickBooks data, do an analysis with our finance manager and myself, and come up with, hey, here's all of the areas that you can make your business more profitable. Have you been thinking about these certain things? And it's a great way for us to also point out like what they're missing or what they're not doing. Whereas if you just tell them that with words without having gone into their data, it feels kind of too generic and not personal enough. So that's an example of if you have a business that works well for foot in the door. Otherwise, I think just being really clear on your packaging and your contracting is really critical for success as an agency. A lot of agency churn that I've seen has been related to a mismatch of expectations versus delivery. And a lot of that mismatch in expectations versus delivery happens in the sales process. And so just being crystal clear and like making sure that your sales team or your sellers are meeting with your delivery team and saying like, these are the actual words that we're saying on sales calls. Does this work for you guys on the delivery side? Or vice versa, the delivery team coming to the sales team and saying, hey, we can't do like this SLA that you keep saying, like we just can't do that. Stop saying it. And then reinforcing that mutual agreement between sales and delivery in the client contracts so that they're hearing it 3 times. They're hearing it in the sales process, they're signing on it in the contracting process, and then it's reinforced in the delivery process. And that way, I think that's a great way to run a sales process and minimize churn down the road.
You mentioned something interesting there about kind of intro offers. How do you think through a product suite? And for most of your kind of businesses, is it just kind of one package for everyone and maybe an intro offer, or do you have kind of other offerings as well?
Again, it's going to depend on the business. So for Profit Labs, I like to have, I'm actually in the process of creating a lot stronger of a mid-funnel. So people can join for an executive briefing where it's basically like a mini webinar for all intents and purposes, where I'm talking about, here's the state of agency. Here's what, we're learning from all of our clients' data that you can, take back to your business and make improvements on, or here's how you can think about profitability or some levers to pull, some experiments to run. And then, in that meeting, I'm offering, hey, for the people who are on this call, now you can join for a profit audit. It's a one-on-one thing. It's paid, but because you joined today, I'll give you a discount, or maybe one person on the call is going to get it for free. Move them down into the funnel to that. Now we're in a one-on-one call with their first-party data, and I'm delivering like actual specific personalized insights for them. It's valuable. Great, they're done with that. Now it's like, okay, there's 2 different packages you can choose if you want to work with us on an ongoing basis. Pick from one of them, and then boom, you're in. So yeah, I think having multiple offers helps, because not everybody's ready to buy, and not everybody's ready to buy the one thing, right? Maybe they just need to dabble a little bit, or they want to taste it before. We have plans that are called like under this bucket called Taste the Rainbow, and then we have Own the Rainbow. So yeah, you need to give different strokes for different folks, give them a path to pay you money.
Okay. And how do you figure out what people want or may want? Because I find like sometimes you're talking to prospects and they might not be the best person to know that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing that happens on a sales call is discovery, right? Like all the words I say are much less important than all the words that I tease out of the client. And that just takes time, and you're refining your sales script over time. You're refining your discovery questions over time. I've been lucky enough to have a wife who managed sales teams for a number of years at Salesforce, and so I've been able to draft off of a lot of her learnings and trainings there in order to run a better sales process for myself and better discovery process.
Okay, interesting. I want to kind of circle back now to what you said before about hiring a managing director. At what stage should someone be at when they're kind of making that decision to step away? And what was that process like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think for agencies, a good litmus test here is, do you have every category of the business operationalized with people? So like if you have an agency and you've got a great ops person, you've got a great project manager leader, you've got a great, HR leader, great talent acquisition person, great, go around the horn, and every category is great. And usually the gotcha is sales. I think you need sales to have at least a great seller. It doesn't have to be a great sales leader, but at least a great seller who's had repeated success before you can consider replacing with a general manager or managing director. That way you can go and hire an MD that is an orchestrator, right? Like you're handing them the keys to a car that functions and saying, manage this car for performance, dial it in and tune it for performance. You're not saying like, I'm handing you a car, it's missing a wheel. So you personally are going to need to figure out this wheel and then also manage the car. It's like, well, that's a different task. And it gets confusing about like, well, now are you going to go, when you're searching for this person, are you searching for someone who's really good at this wheel that you're missing? And maybe they can do the managing too, or they're really good at managing and maybe they can do the wheel too.
Okay. How do you kind of go about finding and vetting that orchestrator?
I've only ever done this from within. So I've always found someone within the business that I have a high degree of conviction in and who is up for the challenge and give them the opportunity to do it. And, sometimes it's worked out, sometimes it hasn't, but I've never yet gone outside of the business for this type of hire.
Why is that?
I like giving people opportunities. It's kind of like an underdog feeling of, hey, like this person wasn't ever considering running an entire business like yesterday, but I can see it in them and I believe that they can do it. And so like, why not give them the shot at that? If I already have trust and rapport with them and the team already likes them. I think there is a lot of risk in bringing someone in from the outside, especially in an agency. I mean, in any business, culture is important, but agencies are so high stress, or they can be so high stress. If you bring someone in who's not familiar with how that culture ebbs and flows and works and all the relationships, and expect that you can stack that on top and not have things fall apart. I mean, obviously it can work. I'm sure it's more normal to do it that way than the way that I do it, but I've just never had the appetite for that risk. And I've preferred giving someone a shot at something that they weren't otherwise thinking about necessarily.
No, I like that. Okay. And then, once they're kind of in the hot seat, how are you kind of setting them up for success? And, is there like a, handover period and what goals and what are you expecting them to do?
So there's always like an overlap period where we're, kind of co-CEOing, so to speak. Especially because of the way that I go about this, each of these leaders is going to be a little bit different as far as what their base skill set is. So maybe they're really strong in operations, but not strong in sales or not strong in the financials of the business. And so I'll create a plan together. We'll create a plan together of here's where you're strong, here's where you're weak relative to the role. Let's figure out like what learnings need to happen between now and the 3 months of this training program, and then reevaluate, 90 days later. It's basically like a SWOT analysis, strength, weakness. And you do one at the beginning, one at the end of the 90 days. If you feel comfortable at the end of the 90 days, you hand the keys over. And then I've always done it where it's like, initially we're going to meet every week. And then once we're comfortable with that, we're going to back off to every month. And then, eventually every quarter. I've actually never made it to every quarter. Everyone's stayed at the monthly cadence. But I also think that's by nature of just the macro times we're in. There's just so much going on in the world that impacts agency business that it's hard to have the same level of predictability that we would need in order for them to go to like a quarterly reporting model.
I want to talk now about kind of, what you're doing today with Profit Labs, and I guess just kick this off generally with a question that's fairly kind of high level, but how should agency owners be thinking about profitability?
Yeah. Oh man, this is such a rabbit hole, but it's one that I enjoy talking about. I find that a lot of agency owners get into business and they start off with just like, I just need to grow revenue. And then they end up with a business, somewhere around the like $1 to $1.5 to $2 million revenue mark. They're like, shit, okay, I've done the thing where I've grown the revenue and I have revenue now, but like the business isn't paying me that much money. And I'm very much involved in all the nitty gritty details. And I'm like working in the business a lot, not on the business. And I don't really like it that much. And I think there are a lot of agency owners who will be listening who find themselves like not particularly liking their business. They're proud of what they built, but it's not making them the money they thought it was going to make them. It's not making them the freedom they thought it was going to make them. And so there are like these three key pillars that I tend to focus people on and refocus people on. The first one is hope is not a strategy. So like if you hope that the business is going to make you a bunch of money and you hope that it's going to be profitable and you just keep focusing on revenue and driving revenue, that's not a good strategy. So the first thing is like, we need to create a plan. We need to create a profit model where we reverse engineer your goals. So if you want to be making $1 million a year in your pocket, not revenue, but like move it into your personal bank account so you can spend it or get taxed on it, then let's start from that goal and back up into, okay, what does our pricing need to look like? What does our churn need to look like? What does our team need to look like? What do our customers need to look like? All of the big levers that are downstream of the revenue that's required to produce the profit goal. And without a clear understanding of each of those levers and what it's going to cost, you're back into the trap of like, if you're just growing revenue, you could have a $10 million business that's only giving you $200,000 a year in income. Like that would be a waste of fucking time for sure, because of the amount of headache that would come along with a $10 million business if you're only making 200K. So first one is hope is not a strategy. Create a profit model, focus on each of those levers, reverse engineer your path to the profit goal that you want. The second is profitability dies in the shadows. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but it is amazing. If you go from running a business that isn't transparent about the key metrics with the leadership team and doesn't keep these key metrics front and center, and those metrics can be anything from operational to financial, and usually a blend of those two is the right blend. If you're not meeting every single week as a leadership team and saying, hey, like our gross margin dipped with this one client and we're actually losing money on this client, or we're at risk of losing money on this client, or maybe it dipped below our threshold value that we've agreed, like every client needs to be above 60% gross margin. If you're not keeping that front and center every week, then you're running the type of business that at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter, you go, wait, where's the money? Like we charged our clients a ton of money. Why aren't we profitable or as profitable as we want to be? And so in order to accomplish that, you have to get all those metrics front and center, keep them front and center, and operate your business around those metrics. So profitability dies in the shadows is the other ethos. And then the last one is about working on the business, not in the business. And again, this saying isn't novel, but so many agency owners find themselves in this trap of, there's so many little administrative things behind the scenes that it's easy to get sucked into as the owner. Like, this client hasn't paid their invoice yet. I need to chase them down, because I own the relationship. I need to chase them down for the late payment, or, I need to manage my cash flow. I need to manage my bookkeeping. There's all these little things that agency owners can get sucked into. And those little things add up. And they also aren't the right things to be spending your time on. But like, it's easy to convince yourself as an agency owner that those are the most important things. Because like, of course you should be collecting money clients owe you. Like that is what's more important than collecting money that clients owe you. But it's all in framing context, because at the end of the day, if your time is the most high leverage, you should absolutely be hiring someone else to be in that like financial back office function. You shouldn't be doing that yourself. That's not high leverage at all. It's actually really low leverage. Yes, you still need to get money coming in the door and manage cash flow and, chase, ARAP, chase down clients, whatever, but like not you personally. Just the business needs to do that. And your time should be spent on, bringing in more business or whatever, driving the strategic direction of the business, whatever is the, your zone of genius, spending more time there. So those are really the three buckets that we tend to advise clients on and help with.
Okay. You mentioned there about kind of a few levers that you can pull for profit. You mentioned kind of pricing and a few others. Can you just kind of explain maybe the top 5 different levers that people should be focused on?
For agencies, pricing is the biggest one, like full stop. Pricing, biggest one, then the delivery team structure. Some people have flat, some people have pod structures. I really like pod structures because you can very easily model out a repeatable, I'll give an example. At Mattermade, I knew back in the day, that each pod would produce $1 million in profit when fully staffed. And I knew exactly what each pod could cost. So I knew we can have this number of seats in the pod, and that pod cannot cost from an expense perspective any more than, I don't remember what the number was, but some sort of very clear number that everybody knows about. And then I know that pod needs to be responsible for servicing X amount of millions in revenue. And when those two things are true, then that pod produces $1 million in net profit, poof. And so then it's easy to say, great, if I want to build a business that is bringing in $3 million net profit, I need 3 pods. And so it just really simplifies the business math and clarifies things we have 1.5 pods. Okay, we're probably at 1.5 million in net profit. So I'd say pricing at team structure or team composition are probably the biggest levers that are going to impact the business the most. Everything else becomes secondary to that in my mind.
Okay. I want to talk briefly about forecasting. And I guess, you start off here, as you said, by kind of picking the main goals and the KPIs from that. You've got your profit targets, but then how do you go about kind of forecasting growth? And here I guess I'm also asking, how granular are you getting? Is it down to, we need this number of sales calls booked, and when we sign X clients, we, are kicking off this hiring process? What does the forecasting process look like?
Yeah, absolutely. We get super down into the weeds with that. You're coming up with good, better, best scenarios. So you don't just have one forecast. You have 3, at a minimum. Then you can also have this idea of micro forecasts. So you can think of this as decisions that the team has been mulling over, but you're not certain about. So you might have a good, better, and best for your core metrics, improving our sales velocity by, or our meetings booked by X%, or let's move what happens if we move our sales close rate from 30% to 33%? What's the impact on the business? And what if we're also able to simultaneously increase prices by $1,000 a month? And so you can piece together all of these variables and create what's our best case scenario, what would be a good outcome, what's our baseline, and maybe even what happens if the train falls off the tracks? What happens if we lose our best customer, our head of delivery quits, and our churn spikes as a result from 5% to 15% for Q4, right? You can get super, super granular. And then this way you're able to see all of these possible futures and plot them out in a single view, and use that to make informed decisions. So I think that's the holy grail that most agency folks are. Sometimes they don't even know that they're missing that until they see it. And they're like, oh, I was just trying to figure this all out in my head and was having a hard time communicating this with our leadership team, and everybody was not on the same page. And now we are.
Okay. And when you say making kind of informed decisions, is that around kind of hiring, turning up ad spend, like those kind of decisions?
Yeah, exactly. Anything that's going to materially impact the financial outcome of the business or the way the business operates.
Okay. And then I don't know if you can answer this question, but what metrics define a healthy agency for you?
At the end of the day, I believe that the only two things that matter, and this is going to be a gross simplification of your question, but the only two things that matter in my mind are like how much profit is going into the agency owner's pocket, how well do you retain team members, which is a signal of like how well do you treat people and just overall like environment that you've created, and how much time do you have to spend on the business in order for it to produce that profit. Like if you can simplify it down into those three metrics, those would tell you, if you're sitting on a beach and you only have those three metrics about someone else's business, you could very easily tell whether or not that business was in a super healthy place or a super not healthy place. Obviously, there are like many, many metrics that you would run the business from that are below that, right? Where those are all the classic metrics, like what's our ASP, what's our churn, retention, list goes on and on and on, that go into the actual like management scorecard. But if we're talking at the owner level, I would say those are the three that matter.
Okay. I want to talk now about a LinkedIn post that I saw of yours, or actually quite a few, actually, I think on this subject, but it was about, I think you did, I want to say $500,000 in revenue and something crazy like 5% kind of profit on that. But you didn't realize till like, I think it was a month or 2 months later. And the point of the post was, you've got to be on top of your numbers. Like you've got to know within a couple of days of kind of month close. Can you just kind of unpack that for me?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually part of my sales deck for Profit Labs, where I pull up. It was May. I've seen it enough times now. I remember it's May of 2022. This was Mattermade, and the P&L. It's a screenshot of the P&L, and it shows we brought in is like $537K in revenue, so a little over $500,000 in revenue for that month, and we only did $35K in net profit. And the reality is, you don't know these things until most businesses don't know that number until their books are closed, which usually happens like halfway through the following month, which means by the time we found that out and had our leadership team meeting about it, figured out what was going on, and had come up with a solution, we'd already burned all of May, all of June, and then hopefully by July, things were getting back on track. Right. So we burned 2, maybe even 2.5 months of profitability because of the delay in reporting and the delay in clarity and the lack in clarity. And so that's where, when I say profitability dies in the shadows, it's like most agency owners can only answer one simple question, which is, how did my business do financially last month? And they can answer that question 15 days after last month. And there's just so much more that goes into it. And there's so many more leading indicators that we can keep tabs on to understand where are we going to fall. And like, again, this goes back to the forecasting, is like, if you are as in touch with your numbers, your metrics, and you have a forecast, you're not going to be blindsided like this. Like, it's just not possible to be blindsided by this.
Okay. So the solution to this, if I'm hearing you correctly, is having these kind of leading indicators that you're tracking. Is that correct? And if so, can you just give me a couple of examples of those indicators?
So it's leading indicators mixed with the lagging indicators, like the classic ones. It's keeping that front and center though, right? It's like making sure that leadership, this is a topic that we haven't talked about, but I firmly believe that your leadership team should have full financial visibility into your business. It took me years and years and years to get comfortable with that idea. For the longest time, I thought, if I open up my books, if I show my leadership team how profitable the business is, they're going to ask for a raise or quit, or they're gonna like, fuck this Eli guy, like he's taking all the money and told me that I couldn't have a raise last week, whatever it is. The reality is, if the business is doing well, your leadership team is going to be doing well. And sure, you might be making 10x more or whatever the number is, but like the right type of leaders are also they want the business to be successful. They want to be working for a business owner or CEO who is crushing it, right? Like that's some even a point of pride that they can take on for themselves. Like, I work for this amazing company. We're growing like crazy. The business owner is super successful. We all get paid well. And the downstream effects of that transparency are incredible. Like, once you can align people on, it used to be, I'll give you a real story. Like, it used to be the case that maybe the leadership team comes to me and they say, we should do an offsite. Let's do an offsite. Let's do an offsite in Mexico. It's going to cost us 50 grand. Get the team together, do rah, rah, rah. And maybe maybe that year wasn't a good year. Maybe that quarter wasn't a good quarter and the business wasn't actually as profitable as it needs to be to support something like that. If you can show them like, hey guys, yeah, we would have loved to do an offsite, but we fucked this quarter up. Like, our gross margin was a disaster. We didn't, certain clients weren't profitable. And like, with what money are we going to host this offsite? And wouldn't that money be better spent on fixing all of the reasons that we didn't perform? And so it just aligns everyone. It creates incredible amount of alignment between owner and leadership team if you can be transparent with those numbers. So I think that's like a huge one that most people don't talk about, and not that many people do.
Okay. I guess on the kind of flip side to this then, are you're opening the books, you're kind of being transparent. Are you also giving those guys a share of the pie, and are you incentivizing them based on the P&L?
Yeah. At the leadership team level, I like bonuses to be tied to profitability. We will set a baseline, like here is where we're trying to go as a business this year from a profit perspective. So like if we make up some numbers here, let's say that we want the business to do $1 million in profit this year. Last year we did 700K. So then we would say, okay, like, what if that's the base goal? What's the stretch goal? Well, it'd be great if we hit 1.5. Okay. So the first tranche of bonus is going to be tied to the business hitting $1 million. Second is going to be tied to 1.5. And now you have a leadership team where everyone is thinking in the same way that you are. They're running, hey, I want to hire this vendor to do this thing for us. But wait, like, that vendor is going to be an expense, and like expenses are taken out. Like, that makes our profitability worse. Do I actually really need that? Or can I find a creative way to do it some other way? So I think that's a powerful way to build alignment with leadership team.
And then just for clarification, in terms of, your definition of the leadership team, how are you defining that on the org chart?
So in my mind, leadership team is heads of. So whoever is the head of project management, they're on the leadership team. Whoever is the head of HR or talent, they're on the leadership team. So if someone has a head of talent, head of title, and they are in charge for that discipline within the company, then they're sitting on the leadership team.
Eli, I think that is the end of my questions. I have really enjoyed it. I've learned a ton. And I just want to say thank you for coming on and sharing all the knowledge.
Yeah, Jordan, thanks for having me. That was very thorough. I liked your questions, and hopefully folks got some interesting nuggets out of it.
For sure. And for people that do want to, kind of get in touch, I'm assuming, people that are listening here are going to be agency owners and, probably interested in Profit Labs more than the other two. Where can people follow you? What type of businesses do you work with at Profit Labs? And what are the next steps?
Yeah, absolutely. So folks can find me on LinkedIn. It's Eli Rubel. You can check out Profit Labs, profit-labs.co. And I have a profitability newsletter for agency owners. So you can go on the website and subscribe to that newsletter, and that'll give you actionable tips and insights in your inbox weekly, specific again for agency owners. So all about how to run a more profitable agency. And yeah, feel free to book time with me if you want to learn more.
Cool. And did you say you also did webinars for Profit Labs?
Yes. Yeah, we do this.
Nice. So is that on the LinkedIn and email list people can?
Exactly. Easiest way would be to sign up for the newsletter, and you'll get information about that.
Eli, it's been a pleasure. Thanks again for coming on.
Awesome, Jordan. Thanks for having me.